how to start reading, especially if you have short attention span, if you are struggling to be focused, if you're not enjoying what you're reading. For most of my teenage years, I've struggled with reading. I didn't think I was dumb. I didn't think that I was incapable of reading books. I always associated reading as a harder task, a less stimulating, less enjoyable, less cool activity. So I'm going to share my story, and then I'll move onwards to how I started reading books and how I'm able to enjoy books like The 6 Easy Pieces by Richard Feynman, which is fantastic. I'm halfway through it and I'm loving the book. I'm really learning about atoms, which I kind of think is unbelievable when I reflect on my past of how I used to think about books. Literally in the past, I had a very hard time enjoying books. So my personal story is that I grew up mostly playing soccer. I played soccer because a lot of my friends convinced me to play soccer, and also because I enjoyed it. That was sort of the social activity that I spent my time in high school and in middle school, and that's pretty much how I made friends and feel socially acceptable and feel normal. So that was sort of the coping mechanism that I was in. So that's why. Now, I've always seen nerds beside me who used to read a lot of books, and they were very intellectual, they were smart, and any topic that you would talk to them, they would pretty much know it. Now, that was always something that was cool, but I tried to connect with them, but I always had like a weird relation with them. And in the back of my mind, even though I knew that socially it was uncool to be like them, I kind of wanted to be like them because I had a genuine curiosity of things, but I wasn't able to ask the right questions and I wasn't able to read. So that was a struggle. Now in high school, whenever we had classes, I would always envy the people that bring those thick books. I remember when I was a kid, some of my friends would bring books by George R.R. Martin, so they'll be reading the whole Game of Thrones trilogy, and then they would also be able to read Shakespeare. When I was reading Shakespeare back then, I had no idea what the hell it was all about. I had a very hard time reading it. I didn't understand. Whenever we had like tests, I was always doing the worst, and I was very embarrassed of it. And then whenever we had readings, we had those dictation tests, and on top of that, we had comprehension test of books that we read. And then we had The Great Gatsby, and then we had Catcher in the Rye, and those are very tough books for me, because I just struggled reading. I remember every time we had 1 hour sessions of reading, I would just run away and play soccer or try to avoid as much as possible. So that was pretty much my whole teenage relation with books. Now, I wasn't the worst in academics, so I was luckily able to pass and to be able to come to college, but I always struggled with reading. So now let's move forward and talk about how to start reading. If you're relating to me, then this video is relevant for you, and I hope this video would help you. How I started reading is actually very simple. What is the most important step? The first step, and this sort of problem or way of breaking down problems is pretty much how I live my day-to-day life now. So whatever task I have, I usually have this sort of notebook and I write down the first step to do. So if I have a test coming up, I would pretty much write down in the list of which particular questions I should hit first. So it's pretty much breaking down the big problem, which is overwhelming, and make it less overwhelming by doing the first thing. So instead of reading hard books, read easy books. So as simple as that. Your attention span is struggling because you kind of crushed your dopamine baseline. Now, most of the time, we usually live in front of screens these days, and our dopamine baseline is completely screwed up. So when we're trying to do an activity like reading, which actually requires your attention and focus because you need to contemplate, then you struggle with it. And that's why after 5 minutes, you start yawning, you start looking away, you start looking for other things to do, you start thinking and reflecting of other activities because you're bored. Maybe actually the book is boring and you should just shift the book. But most of the time it's because you're not able to focus. So start off with 5 minutes even. That's a very simple step to improve your focus and just make it a new habit. A very good analogy is like video games. Most of the time you're able to focus on video games for hours and hours until you feel the crash where your body and your brain just feels tired and fatigued. That's probably the time when you give up. And when you look at the time, you've probably passed over 5 hours. Isn't that crazy? Well, that's because you were so stimulated. The activity completely hooked you on. You actually want to do that with books, but that would take time. So it's like XP points in video games. You want to build up over time. So what I would recommend is set a timer. That's actually how I did it. I made a video of how I started reading 4 years ago on YouTube. So if you want to check that out, just probably search on the search bar and you'll probably find it. But basically that's how I started doing it. I set a timer and started reading easy books. I initially started with self-help books because that kind of resonated with me. Like most avid readers start off with fiction books, which I wasn't really able to get into, but that's because at that age I wasn't really reading. So if you're kind of older, you want to start reading, I recommend maybe a category that you resonate with. So it could be fantasy, it could be sci-fi. The only thing that matters is that you're reading. So that's how you start off. Then onwards, you want to move to increasing your time. So maybe try to focus for 30 hours. 30 minutes, 30 hours, goddamn. 30 minutes. And then try to increase the time limit. And then you'll be able to focus for longer and longer. So set a timer, read easy books first, and then gradually increase the difficulty as you're doing it in video games. So as simple as that. Now, the second advice that I'll give you is set it on calendar. So time block a reading time where you think you're most active to read. Right now, I'm at a level where I can read whenever I want to. So I don't really have a specific time block for reading, even though I would like to. I do it sometimes, but now I think I've improved my focus at a level where I enjoy such books like this one that I just showed you, the 6 Easy Pieces, which actually requires you to focus a lot to understand physics and concepts. If you're reading about atoms, you really need to understand what they're talking about. So especially if it comes from a person like Richard Feynman, which is brilliantly written and really inspiring. And I think most people agree that he's very humorous. So that's something that I really enjoy. But to get at a level where you start really enjoying like I am right now, I think you have to build up over time, and it's going to require patience. It's like learning any new skill. You eventually improve your focus. Now, you could be using Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, doesn't really matter. Just time block a reading time. I advise most mornings would be the best time for you to read before your day starts, because then you're most alert. Now, the third advice, this is probably one of the most important, is to reduce your television, your social media time. I think these two activities are good in some way, but to be brutally honest, it's not that you are not good at reading, it's that your brain is occupied with irrelevant and unnecessary thoughts, especially if they are graphic. So you want to avoid those as much as possible. If you really pay attention, most readers aren't really on YouTube and aren't really on Instagram, aren't really on TikTok, especially TikTok, aren't really watching that much movies, to be honest. And that's something that I've realized. It's just like being on the other side of the world. You have to be one of them to be a reader. Obviously, in terms of being a reader, is extremely beneficial, and most smart people say that it's really good for you. So I don't want to really talk about that. But the huge benefit that I felt is my ability to be present, my ability to enjoy myself, enjoy my thoughts. And I think that's really something that's enjoyable. And my attention span has increased a lot. I'm genuinely quite happy being alone, which is quite weird. I had a huge anxiety of being alone, and I had to pretend to be an extrovert, but I think innately I'm an introvert, and I kind of get genuine happiness from just like being alone in my room sometimes and like thinking and reading and reflecting on myself. Like that's kind of enjoyable for me. So that's like the level you might get at later, if that's the path you want to go to. But if you're like super social, I'm sure there's still a lot of benefits of just being able to sit quietly and read as you think over your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed and hope you will be able to focus longer and read more, because reading will be the solution for you to improve your attention span. My story was that I wasn't able to read and now I am. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys. Peace.